Hi everyone, this is Marvel Champions Deck Discussions, or MC Deck Discussions, and this is Abi Small, but you can call me Abis. And our primary focus on this channel is to discuss Marvel Champions decks, and that's what we're here to do again today. So this deck is meant to be a follow-up to a previous deck that I had built, which was a leadership deck with Magneto, and in that leadership deck it had 46 cards, far more cards than I normally put together in a deck, and I wanted to follow that up with then another deck, in this case Justice, that has closer to what we might consider an optimum 40 cards. So this one has 40 cards in it. You can see there are 12 packs required for it, and the name of this deck is Judge, Jury, and X-ecutioner. And let's go ahead and dive right into this deck. Now, because I covered in detail in the previous video with leadership all of the allies and all of those various characters, the different events and everything in detail last time, I want to do this more as an overview and focus in on the primary, you might say, synergistic characteristics of this deck. So let's get into the allies first. So you can see here that we have Beak, Dazzler, Forge, Lockjaw, Nick Fury, Professor X, and White Fox. So a particular note in this Justice build would be Dazzler and Professor X, in particular for their abilities to, let's go ahead and click on Dazzler. So we can see Dazzler is a 4-cost ally, has 2 attack and 2 thwart, and 3 health. And this response after Dazzler enters play, confuse an enemy. So that is a big reason why Dazzler is in this deck. And then same with Professor X. So Professor X has a forced response after Professor X enters play. Choose one, confuse the villain. That's the primary usage. But we might also periodically stun a minion or ready an X-Men character. And I did actually use Professor X to ready an X-Men character once in a while with this deck. But let's look at what this is supposed to be synergistically used with. So first of all, confusing the villain, of course, is very powerful. And so if we confuse the villain, it makes it harder for them to scheme. And on top of that, what makes it even tougher for the villain when it comes to scheming and accomplishing their goals of defeating the scheme or completing the scheme is we also have in this deck, if we look over at the upgrades, we have counterintelligence. So counterintelligence is an upgrade that you put out, and it has an interrupt on it. When any amount of threat would be placed on the main scheme, discard counterintelligence and prevent 3 of that threat. So the nice thing about counterintelligence is it's kind of like a backup confusion. Or suppose you confuse the villain, and despite confusing the villain, you're in alter ego form. The villain is confused the first time, but then you end up pulling a card that allows the villain to activate again, and you then don't have a way to stop that. Well, counterintelligence gives you that way so that the scheme stays out there and doesn't go to the next scheme, or perhaps leads to defeat. And one more card that also goes along these lines would be Under Surveillance. So Under Surveillance, you attach to the main scheme, and it increases the threat value of that main scheme by 4. So that also makes it more challenging. So the nice thing about, here's why I like having these 2 cards in the same deck. So I've seen lots of builds, and I can see the reason why, that might have 2 of these Under Surveillance. You can only have 1 Under Surveillance, right? Max, it says max 1 per scheme. You can also only have 1 Counterintelligence, max 1 per player. So if you're playing solo, you can only have 1 of these out to stop that threat from happening. So together, it's like having 2 counterintelligence cards at the same time, adding to even more prevention. So when I play those 2 cards together, or put 2 cards in that deck together, I'm happy to get either one out, and especially happy if I can get both out. but they are, it's as if having two copies of the same card, or complementary cards in this case. And then when you add that together with Dazzler's ability and Professor X's ability to confuse the villain, it makes it very difficult for the villain to make any headway whatsoever when it comes to their schemes. Then if we move on to the events, we also have 3 Clear the Area, which does 2 major things for us. So first of all, it removes 2 threat from a scheme, which is great. However, on top of that, if it removes the last threat on that scheme, you get to draw a card. So that's another area of this, or I should say strength of this deck, is card draw. So what makes this deck powerful are 2 things: preventing the villain from being able to accomplish its goals in defeating you through thwarting, but also drawing lots of cards so that you can both deal lots of damage to the villain, clear out the minions, take care of any schemes that have threat on them. So Clear the Area has 2 of those effects at the same time. Then that's complemented further with One Way or Another. So a hero action: search the encounter deck for a side scheme, reveal that side scheme, and draw 3 cards. Now, one of the things I highly recommend is look through the encounter deck ahead of time and see how many of those side schemes you have in the deck. Now, you might think that, well, is that really, are you really allowed to do that? Well, suppose you had just played against the villain, and when you're done playing, you could see in the discard pile how many schemes there were, and you counted them at that time. So I just count them ahead of time as if I had already played. I've played all the villains before, so I should know how many of those side schemes they have. So I count those ahead of time so that I know, and then I look in the discard pile before I play One Way or Another to know for sure that I have another side scheme available. Then the other part of the events that is very powerful in this deck, so this is a switch into a different strategy, and that is major damage. So if you look at Magneto in his deck, if we look at some of his cards, so scroll down to the events, and we look at, here it is, Metal Shards. So Metal Shards is his attack event, and it costs 3. It deals 7 damage to an enemy. So not a huge amount of damage, but it has that extra benefit of if you defeat an enemy, you get a tough status card. So a lot of times you can selectively use this card so that you make sure to get that status card. But 7 damage may not be a lot of damage, but it's a fair amount. If you add to it, however, 2 Waylay cards from Justice, it has a hero response: after your hero thwarts, deal 4 damage to an enemy. So as long as you can thwart with Waylay or Clear the Area or his Electro-matic, so let's take a look at this, or his Electro-matic Blast. So he has a couple of copies of this that is a thwart that allows him to remove 3 threat from a scheme. So he has plenty of opportunities to thwart and therefore use Waylay. And 4 damage isn't a lot, but most of the time you will set this up so that you can do 7 damage instead, because if that thwart removes the last threat from a scheme, it'll do 7 damage instead. There's a big difference between having 2 cards, 2 Metal Shards cards that can deal 7 damage, and 4 cards that can do so. The damage output in this deck is actually significant. So not only does this deck handle threat really well, both from Clear the Area, Electromatic and Electromatic Blast, as well as the allies contributing to that as well, but it also can deal a significant amount of damage and just handle everything that comes its way. And that is in fact what happened. So let's look at some of the other rest of the deck real quickly. So we have player side schemes, build support, specialized training, superpower training. We have the usual resources: energy and genius and strength, plus he has his own 2 double resources as well. And then for the supports that were added, we have Avengers Mansion. I think I mentioned this before. I don't include Avengers Mansion actually in a lot of decks, but if those decks have lots of double resources, then I do include Avengers Mansion. If it's convenient to get it out, then I'll put it out into play. And then we have the X-Jet and Utopia. And then we already looked at most of the upgrades, but it also includes Skilled Investigator, which contributes even more to the card draw. So if we click on Skilled Investigator, this is an upgrade, and it costs 0 to play. And it has a hero response. After a side scheme is defeated, exhaust Skilled Investigator and draw a card. So we have 3, 4 cards, 5, 6 cards that allow you to draw, plus Magneto has his own ability to draw with his magnetic pull ability. So as a reminder what that is, it's discard cards from the top of your deck until a magnetic card is discarded, add that card to your hand. So that's another form of card draw. So between them, that is a lot of card draw. Very powerful deck. Definitely I would say it was more powerful than the leadership build that I had, though I liked that build a lot. But this one there was far more control, I would say, from this deck, and the damage output was, like I said, was highly significant. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next, some of the stuff under the description as well. We've covered most of it, but I want to mention just some other things that weren't mentioned yet. So first of all, the villains that were tested against, it was undefeated this time. Same villains as the leadership decks. We have Claw, Rhino with the Doomsday Chair encounter set included, and then the 5 Mutant Genesis villains. And then if we go down to the rest of this description, I don't really see anything else to add that hasn't already been said, but let's go ahead and glance through the rest of these notes real quickly. No, I think that's pretty much it. So there's the deck, Judge, Jury, and X-ecutioner. Like I said, I think it's a really powerful deck. I hope some of you try it out. And if you decide to try this out and make your own modifications to it, I'd be curious to hear what those modifications were. Please let me know what they are. And who knows, I might also try the deck with your modifications, kind of see what kind of impact that might have on the way the deck plays. All right, everybody have a good one. I'll talk to you next time.